over the page, you'll see, let me get this in the screen where you can see it here. You'll see that there's this big long line that asks you for the circumference of a circle. And I think most of you guys know what the circumference of a circle is. Circumference is just a fancy way of talking about the perimeter of a circle. Right? The circumference of a circle is just the perimeter of a circle. It's if you go around the circle and you measure how long it is to go all the way around the circle, that is the perimeter. And you guys will notice that this word perimeter starts with the letter P, which, if you were to translate the letter P into Greek, the letter P in Greek isn't pronounced P, it's pronounced pi, and it's written like this. And there's a reason why we use the letter pi to talk about circumference in circles. Because if you have the diameter of a circle, you just have to multiply it by the perimeter number, and that will give you the perimeter of the circle. Right? That's really just the formula for circumference right there. You take the diameter, you multiply it by the perimeter number, the p number, the pi number, and you get the circumference. So you just take that diameter, multiply it by pi, and that gives you your circumference. So what that pi number is just the ratio between the circumference and the diameter of the circle. Oops, let me make it show up here. The ratio between the circumference and the diameter of the circle. So if I want to know what the circumference is and I have the diameter, then I know that I can think of it like this. Circumference over diameter equals pi over 1. All right. The circumference over the diameter equals pi over 1. That's like a proportion, right? We can write it like this. Let me give you just an equal sign. And I could say the circumference over the diameter equals pi over 1. That's the ratio. And let me put a 1 in here for 1. I'm going to put an approximation of pi here because the number goes on forever. That's one of the interesting things we'll talk about. So this ratio, 3.14159 blah, 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 over 1 equals circumference over diameter. So let's say I know that the diameter of a circle is 10 centimeters. And I wanted to know what the circumference was. Well, if I do something like the fish method, and I know that, let's say up here, this is my circumference. I can use the letter C to represent it. Then to find the circumference, I'd do this times this divided by this to give me the circumference. So 10 centimeters times pi divided by 1 gives me C. Or if I think of it as just like this, if I say to myself, instead of using actual numbers, I say the letter pi, right, the symbol, I should just use the symbol here, over 1 is equal to the circumference over the diameter. Then if I just cross multiply, I get 1 times C, which is C, is equal to pi times the diameter, which brings us to one of our important formulas. The circumference of the circle, circumference equals pi times diameter. That's the big first formula you need to know. And it's one I know you guys have already seen, but this is why it is what it is. It's just the ratio of the perimeter to the diameter times the diameter, because of cross multiplication gives you circumference. All right, so let's do a couple of examples, a couple of problems to see where that works. These are just down at the bottom of the page you have there. But I want to find the circumference of these circles. All right, I know that circumference equals pi times diameter. Here I've got a diameter, 12 millimeters. So if I say to myself, circumference equals pi times diameter, like that, and all I have to do is, if I'm looking for circumference, I can plug in this diameter. Circumference equals pi times 12 millimeters. Right? And then I'll get the circumference here. So let me get out my calculator. Because of all the numbers that are in pi, I say, all right, pi times diameter. Pi is right there. See, it's got a whole lot more numbers, and there are even more that aren't showing on the screen. Just multiply that by 12 millimeters, and that gives me the answer for the circumference. 37.699, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to round it to 2 decimal places, which in this case wouldn't be 37.69. Properly round it. Notice there's a 9 here, so I have to round this up to 37.70, which I don't bother writing the 0, so I just write 37.7, and of course I put my units millimeters. That is my circumference here. This one's a little bit more complicated. It says the area of the square, not the area of the green part. You might think, oh, the green part here is the area that it's telling me. No, it says the area of the whole square is 225 centimeters squared. Well, if the area of the square is 225 centimeters squared, then like we saw in the Pythagorean theorem unit we just did, that means I can find one side of the square by getting the square root. So let's get the, if I know that, let's say the side of the square here, I'm going to call it d. I know that d squared equals 225 centimeters squared, right? Let me just write this here. So if I want to find out what d is, then what I have to do is I have to square root both sides. I'm going to square root this, and I'm going to square root that, right? So that means that my next line is going to be d is equal to the square root of 225. Let me just square root 225 here, and I get 15. So I can say that the diameter here, sorry, the d here is 15 centimeters. That's my next line here. Diameter d equals 15 centimeters. Now you notice I keep saying diameter. That's not well, it is an accident, but there's a reason why I'm building that accident. If I figured out that this side here, if I just figured out that d is 15 centimeters, and that's just the side of the square is 15 centimeters, like that's what I figured out, knowing that the area of the square is 225 centimeters squared, then this 15 centimeter length here has to be the same as this. And this here, you'll see, is a diameter of the circle. That's why I kept saying diameter. D is 15 centimeters. So the diameter of the circle is 15 centimeters. And if the diameter of the circle is 15 centimeters, then I can remember the circumference is equal to, oops, why that didn't work. Let's try that again. Oh, it went up there. Okay. Circumference is equal to pi times the diameter. So if the diameter is 15 centimeters, then I can find out the circumference by saying pi times 15 centimeters. And I get 47.12 centimeters when I round it to the nearest hundredth. C equals whatever it was, 47.12 centimeters. There you go. All right. Hopefully this will get you off to a good start. We'll move on to a little bit more complicated material in just a second.